حضرات السيدات والسادة، يسعدني أن أعلن اليوم عن إطلاق مشروع مركز التشريع الإسلامي والأخلاق ليعزز بنية كلية الدراسات الإسلامية. اليوم اكتملت شروط نضج تلك البنية لتصبح حاجة أكثر إلحاحاً وضرورة، ليس فحسب بسبب الطفرة المعرفية والمعلوماتية الهائلة التي علينا أن ننخرط فيها، وإنما أساساً بسبب التحولات الكبرى التي شهدتها منطقتنا العربية مؤخراً، والتي تبشر ببزوغ عهد جديد بمفاهيم ومنطلقات وأيضاً تحديات لم يكن لدى الكثير من محللي التوقعات تصور إمكانية حدوثها. أمام هذه التحولات أضحى من مسؤوليتنا الجماعية العمل على إحياء علوم ديننا، وأنا هنا أستعير مقاربة أبي حامد الغزالي للتقريب بين الملل والمذاهب لأجل إصلاح المجتمع. وفقكم الله وشكرا لكم.
هناك معنى آخر ومفهوم آخر للإصلاح، فنجد في بعض الأمور الإصلاح التحولي، والمقصود هنا أننا لا نريد الالتزام بالمبادئ الإسلامية وحماية الدين فحسب، بل نريد إصلاح الواقع باسم المبادئ الإسلامية وفي ضوء القيم الإسلامية والأخلاق ومقاصد الشريعة.
التجديد هنا لا يعني الهدم والإزالة، ولا يعني كذلك التجميل والزخرفة الشكلية، وإنما التجديد يعني الحفاظ على الأسس والأصول والثوابت والدعائم مع إعادة الترتيب والهيكلة والصياغة للتفاصيل والجزئيات.
الفقه الإسلامي الحقيقي مربوط بالأخلاق كما هو مربوط بالمصالح، كما هو مربوط بالأهداف الكبرى والمقاصد العليا للأمة وللإنسانية. هذا ما يجب أن نعنى به.
نحن مسلمون مطالبون أمام الله ثم أمام الإنسانية بأن نقدم معنى الإيمان ونعيش بموجبه باعتباره نموذجا ساميا من الأمن الخارجي والداخلي للفرد والمجتمع، فضلا عن الثقة بالنفس والشخصية الإنسانية في إطار الحرية وحقوق الإنسان. ونحن العلماء المسلمون مطالبون بتقديم كل أوجه الدعم لمركز دراسات التشريع الإسلامي والأخلاق في الدوحة حتى ينجح في مهمته النبيلة لإنقاذ البشرية من الضلال باتباع المبدأين القرآنين، وهما الحركة الدائمة والتوازن التام.
We need new ideas for the humanity. We need new hopes for people who are falling in depression. We need new vision for the young generations.
قمة الهرم هو الأخلاق، ولا يكتمل إيمان المؤمن ولا عبادته ولا معاملته إلا به. خلق في التعامل مع الله والإيمان به، وخلق في التعامل مع مخلوقات الله سبحانه وتعالى، السماء بمن فيها وبمن أضلت، والأرض بمن فيها وبمن أقلت.
إن مهمة الكلية هي إرساء فكر ينهل من تعددية وسماحة الفقه الإسلامي وحضارته، ويعلي قدرة المسلمين فهما وممارسة. المركز يجسد جانبا من هذه الرؤية ويعمل على ترسيخها.
ضمن الإبداعات الطيبة التي الحمد لله جاءت في وقتها، فأنا أتوقع من هذا المركز ما قام به أبو حامد الغزالي، وهذا أيضا أشارت إليه أختنا الفاضلة صاحبة السمو حينما أشارت إلى أبي حامد. فنحن نتوقع أن ننطلق من نفس المنطلق الذي انطلق منه علماؤنا.
فنحن يعني نهتم بهذا الجانب، هذا الذي يقوم عليه هذا المركز، يبين قيمة الجانب الأخلاقي في التشريع الإسلامي. والنبي صلى الله عليه وسلم حينما قال إنما بعثت لأتمم مكارم الأخلاق.
And the three main objectives are this one. First is to change the methodology. So to say for any of the fields that we want to tackle, what we need is to come with the scholars of the text and the scholars of the context. The second thing which is important is not only to come with theories but to be very practical. And the last one is to start from the Islamic viewpoint and to come to the shared universal ethics and ethical values.
نحن نتغير بهذا المركز أن نخاطب فئات ثلاثة في الحقيقة. الفئة الأولى هي فئة العلماء والباحثين الذين يريدون أن يبحثوا في هذه الموضوعات التي يبحث فيها المركز، والفئة الثانية هي طلبة العلم حتى تصاغ أفكارهم وتصاغ مشاريعهم ويصاغ النشاط الذي يقومون به في الجمعيات المختلفة وفي الهيئات المختلفة حسب رؤية المركز في الأخلاق الإسلامية. والمستوى الثالث هو المستوى العام. المركز يقوم بتنظيم ورش عمل سنوية ومؤتمرات دولية، ويطبع نتائج هذه الورش والمؤتمرات في كتب. المركز أيضا يقدم ورش عمل ودورات تدريبية في مختلف أنحاء العالم.
بالنسبة لتحقيق المركز لأهدافه سيحتاج إلى مدة من العمل ويحتاج إلى مجهودات. ما رأيناه اليوم في الافتتاح هو لبنة أولى.
The center itself and the scholars at the center can work to create language that is picked up by, say, international climate negotiators. That we can work with Western ethicists, Western policy analysts and policymakers to come together and think about questions related to rights and justice and equity.
This center comes at a critical time in history where no longer are the issues that the center will be grappling with just an academic interest. Today we have legislators not only writing new laws but writing new constitutions.
This is a center that has direct relevance to today in two specific ways. You've got a fairly seismic shift taking place in the Arab world and the broader Muslim world. Movement from, as some would put it, from dictatorship to democracy, or at least in some cases just demanding more democratization. Okay. On the other hand, you also have growing Islamophobia, discrimination against Muslims, fear of Islam in the West, and that is often expressed in terms of Sharia/Islamic law.
Arts is a field where we need to come with people who are practitioners, who are talking from within. So, and with their experience, they are questioning the scholars.
Without music, without some kind of aesthetic contribution, it will be very difficult for the Muslims to affect or to encourage people in the West to even look at Islam. And so therefore we have to revive a new spirit of vision and beauty, which is ihsan, if ihsan also means beauty. So we hope that inshallah ethics and aesthetics will live together, and East and West can only be brought closer together through this kind of effort and this kind of cultural and intellectual and legal approach, not by invasions.
Most modern art is about I, me, mine. It's about the nafs, about the ego. But traditional art and Islamic art is God-inspired, and that's the difference between it, and that's what we're really aiming at.
Here this evening, alhamdulillah, in the name of the Center for Islamic Legislation and Ethics. This is the second lecture. Alhamdulillah, we had the first one, I think 3 weeks ago, with Dr. Jasser Auda, who you saw the pastor right now. So it was also about the relationship between ethics and Islamic legislation. And this is the second one, and inshallah we'll have 2 others in the coming months related to the CILE Center, the center itself, and this is what we are trying to organize here. So, as you heard, just something very quick about the center, because what we want is also to have you knowing what we are trying to do and being connected in one way or another with our research center through different fields that we are tackling, and we have some of the leaflets outside that you can take and read about the different areas. There are in fact 11 areas on which we are working and trying to deal with this very issue of disconnection and this relationship between ethics and legislation. So I will try to stick to my time, 45 minutes, and then to give you the floor for questions on the issue. And today, what I want to discuss is the need for Islamic ethics when dealing with Islamic legislation. Because this is once again something which is part of what we are trying to say and to show as the philosophy of our center, is to understand this relationship between Islamic ethics and legislation. So let me start with an introduction, and I want to tackle 4 points. Can you hear me? Is that okay? It's okay. Very often when we talk about ethics, what we are talking about here is values that are setting what is right and what is wrong, what is good and what is bad. So there are values, and we are referring to values, and we are referring to values that in fact in the legal system they are going to be translated into law. So law are in fact and are perceived and understood as this translation of what ethics are, so from values to norms. Now, inductively, if we can, and this is the second point, so we are talking here about what is right, what is good, and what is wrong. And by the way, if we go to philosophical discussion, there is a difference between what is good and bad and what is right and wrong. I'm not going to talk about this. This is another discussion that we may have when it comes to this inductive process from the legal framework to the normative and the values that we are talking about. Now, when we come to the first Islamic science, and this is the second point that I'm raising here, fiqh, Islamic law and jurisprudence, what is understood, and this was understood by the first scholars at the very beginning of Islam, and this was confirmed if you go back to the work of Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyya, for example, and then al-Shatibi, and before this Abu Hamid al-Ghazali. What was understood is in the field of legislation, all what is right in legal terms is understood as being good. All what is right in legal terms is good for human beings. So, and what is considered as illegal is considered as being bad. So there is something which inductively, by reading the Quran, they were coming to what was behind the rules. And what was behind the rules is, in general terms, the norms that are translated to the legal framework is what is legal is good, what is illegal is bad. So we go here from something which is the legal framework, which is the first thing that the Muslim scholars were dealing with in the fiqh and the way they were understanding the Quran, which is the relationship between the legal and the values that are behind the legal framework. Now, having said this, it doesn't mean that because everything which is legal is good and everything which is illegal is bad, it doesn't mean that everything which is good is going to be translated into the legal framework. So what is right from law to value is not always the case from value to law. So there are many things that are good that are not going to be legalized or codified through a system. So there is, even in al-ahkam al-taklifiyya, when we speak about al-halal, al-haram, al-makruh, al-mustahab, and all this, there is al-mubah, which is permissible without being codified. So it's permissible by its very nature. You can do this, but it's not going to be, so it's good, but there is not a specific law telling you you should do this and that. It's good by itself. And we have this in the Islamic, the legal categorization here, which is, even when we talk about what is right in cultural terms, and even we come to the Quran, this is why the scholars from the very beginning introduce something which as a source of law, al-urf. And when we read the Quran, al-ma'ruf is known by the people as being good without having a specific rule on it. And this is why the values are wider than the legal system. The legal system is translating something, but it's not reducing everything which has to do with the norms into law. All the law should be protecting the good, but everything which is good is not reduced or embodied in the law. And this relationship is what we have in the legal philosophical history, even in non-Muslim history, is the relationship between the values and the norms. And if you read Kant, this is what he's saying: there are things that are good that are not legal in itself, but what we are expecting from a legal system is to protect what is good in itself. So this is something that we find in the Islamic tradition, and we'll see how when the ulama, the fuqaha, were dealing with the rules in the Quran, they were inductively going from the rules to the norms and trying to get the norms. By definition, implicitly, they had to do this. But not only when they were dealing with the rules, but also when they were dealing with human beings, by defining how do you deal with human beings. Because behind any ethical system, there is a concept of human being. There is a concept of human being when you have an ethical system. So you'll see that in all the philosophies, with or without God, you will find a concept of human being. And even in Islam, implicitly in all what the scholars were saying about human being, there is a concept of human being. And this concept of human being is very much connected in anything that has to do with the relationship that we have with the law, the way we have to understand. And if we forget this, we end up, and this is the first dimension, was why ethics, it's important, because out of ethics you get a concept of human being, and with the concept of human being you know how you have to deal with law legislation. And you give from the very beginning substance and meaning to the legal system out of this concept of human being. So very often we go straight to the rules and we forget the fact that with the rules there is a concept of human being. And sometimes history is coming back to us, and we are asked about some of these dimensions, and I will come back to this in the first part. Now, if we talk about this, and we talk about this relationship between values and norms, so once again, all the norms and the legal and the norms and ahkam, behind the ahkam and understanding the ahkam means that there is an understanding that this is good in itself when it's legalized and codified, and anything which is perceived in legal terms as bad is, or illegal is conceived as qabih or bad or not acceptable. Now, the question here is why, knowing this relationship, which is a very complex relationship, even in the Islamic tradition. You will see, if you read all what the scholars have produced over centuries, you can understand that this is not an easy task to understand the relationship between the legal system and hukm and the meaning and the norms that are behind, if there is something behind, and even the reasons, and I will also come to this. Having said that now, so my question is really why this is necessary, why we have to keep this understanding between the norms, the rules, al-ahkam, al-tashri', and the ethical dimension. So between the legal or the law and the norms, between the law and the principle which is behind, why is it important to keep this and to think about it from a legal perspective and from an ethical perspective and from an Islamic viewpoint? Why this is important? So let me start with a first part here, which is when it comes to legislation and the legal framework itself. So understanding fiqh and understanding its implementation, applying fiqh. When we come to what the scholars did from the very beginning, and they were dealing with the Quran and Sunnah, and this is the starting point of everything when it comes to Islamic ethics and Islamic legislation. We all agree, and this is bil-ijma' al-tam, this is a consensus, this is part of our Islamic understanding. We rely first on the Quran and then the other sources, the Sunnah, and we might add other things, but mainly there is a revelation, there is one God, so the oneness of Tawheed, it's important as the starting point of everything. And I want this to be clear, is before saying we rely on the text, we rely on the text sent by the creator of humanity. And I keep on repeating this because it's something which is a sharia, the one who was the legislator has an intention. He has an objective. So every time we read, what we are trying to reach is the intention of the creator sent through the book. So it's not only the book, it's something which is the relationship with God. It's important. Why? Because at the end of the day, the way we think about Him is also the way we have to think about our own relationship with the text. I'm saying this because in the mystical tradition, in the Sufi, they are right by saying, be careful. Sometimes you are so focused on the book that you forget the creator of the book. And by forgetting it, Tawheed, the intention, the relationship with Him, you misunderstand sometimes the very essence of the book. At the end of the day, before saying Khalaq al-Quran, there is Ar-Rahman. So Ar-Rahman is coming first, the most merciful is the first, and then He taught the Quran, and then human beings, and etc. We will come to these verses later, but that's the point which is important in all our understanding, even when we deal with the legal framework. It's coming from somewhere with, and from someone, the oneness of God, it's important with a specific intention. Now, what understood by the scholars implicitly in all what we have coming from the legal framework. When you deal with fiqh, and when we deal with the legal framework, there is implicitly, or there are implicitly, three principles that are everywhere, are the substance of all what is said. The first is an important dimension that we have also in the verse that I was just quoting now, that Allah, God is sending a book to be read and understood and to be taught. Al-Rahman, Allama al-Quran, He's sending a revelation to be read. Aqra, Bismi Rabbika alladhi khalaq, is that you have to read, and meaning that you have to read, yet you have to use your mind. So there is a human, the concept of human being is use your mind to read, and to read, but not only to read, to understand, to learn, because it has to be taught. The Quran, Allama al-Quran is a learning process. He taught the Quran, so we have to learn. So implicitly there is something which is everything in the legal tradition is a concept of human being, which is use your mind to get the meaning of the book. And to get the meaning of the book is come close to the intention of God. come close to what he wanted out of this book. And what he wanted is, this is why some scholars were saying, he's not saying Allah is Ar-Rahman, which is one quality that he is Ar-Rahman, the most merciful. He sent the book as something which is mercy. وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. It's out of mercy that he sent the messenger. It's out of mercy that he's sending the book. Mercy is in the relationship that you have with him through the book. And the book is relying on your intellect in the way you are going to deal with it. And this is important, as I was saying, in the way we have to deal sometimes with some literalists that are forgetting these dimensions. So intellect is an implicit way or an implicit reference to the concept of human being. Now, what was also said when we deal with the legal framework, and you have this understood in the classical tradition and by all the scholars, but it's implicit. But I want you to understand why I'm starting with this, because there are too many things that are implicit, and by the fact that we are not recalling them, we are not stressing what it means to deal with human beings in such a way, we are forgetting the objectives and we are forgetting the meaning of what we are dealing with. So the concept of human being here is quite important. And anything, if you read about ethics in all the books, Muslim, the classical Islamic tradition, or in the West, Islam or ethics has to do with obligation. Obligation means we are talking with you have to choose what is right and to avoid what is bad. So when it has to do with obligation, it means that not only you have to use your mind, but from the very beginning, obligation means responsibility, and responsibility means freedom. No responsibility without freedom. So implicitly, this is something that we will find as something which is the very meaning of the legal framework. We have rules and we have limits because we have choice, responsibility, and we need to choose and we need to decide for ourselves. So the very beginning is just to choose if we are believer or not. فَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيُؤْمِنْ وَمَنْ شَاءَ فَلْيَكْفُرْ. There is something which is you have to decide, you have to take a stand. So you are free. And the second is al-mukallaf, means exactly this. You are Muslims without choice before becoming Muslim through your conscience by choosing. So al-mukallaf means that at one point you are expected to act in such a way out of your conscience. You have to take a decision. So this decision and this obligation, ethics for human beings, means the very essence of humanity is freedom, is we have to protect freedom. And when it comes to anything which has to do with ethics in economy, ethics in politics, if we don't start with ethics in all these fields, means that in all these fields we are acknowledging the fact that we are dealing with free human beings. Free human beings that has, and using their intellect to find their way based on Al-Quran, of course the revelation, but based also on their morality and ethics. So al-wajib, the obligation, the fact that we have to decide is implicitly saying this. So second thing, intellect, the second is freedom. The third one is something that we find in almost all the tracts, in the Sufi tradition, first in the classical legal tradition, in the mystical tradition, in the philosophical tradition, is something which is said by the scholar, which is the innate and natural common moral sense that we have in us. So, in fact, not only we have an intellect, but we also have, and we have freedom, but we have a natural moral sense that is there in us. And we find this, we have this, وَنَفْسٍ وَمَا سَوَّاهَا فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا, that we are created with the sense that there is something which, what is good and what is bad is somewhere in us, that we have this, it's natural in us. This is the natural moral sense that is here. Not only we have this, we have also other verses. وَهَدَيْنَاهُ النَّجْدَيْنِ. It's just we have to, we know the two ways, what is good and what is bad. And this is what the scholars were saying, is that there is a natural yearning towards God, and there is something in us which is this common moral sense. Meaning by this that at the same time we have this, but we have a verse telling us إِنَّ النَّفْسَ لَأَمَّارَةٌ بِالسُّوءِ, that we are attracted by what is bad. But this is something that is, this attraction means that at the same time we have a conscience that is helping us to understand how we have to act. And this is the conscience. بَلِ الْإِنسَانُ عَلَى نَفْسِهِ بَصِيرًا, that we have something in us that is checking the way we are dealing. So we have this freedom, we have this moral sense, natural moral sense, which is part of who we are as human beings. So not only we will have rules coming in the Quran, but the rules that are coming in the Quran as are based and must be understood also, and are going to be understood by the fitra that is in us, that is call for what is good. So there is this sense of three things that we'll have as the starting point of the concept of human being. And you will see in everything that we are going to talk about, downstream, all what we are talking about here in ethics and legislation, that this concept of humanity is important. And very often when I talk with people coming from different traditions, Christians, Jews, atheists, agnostics, very often to be able to come to share ethical values, there is something from the very beginning that should be discussed about our concept of human being. In the way we are talking about the three dimensions. First, your mind is necessary to understand and to set rules when it comes also in reading the Quran. The second is our common freedom, and the third one is this moral sense. And it could be that some people are saying, no, you know, what was said by Hobbes, for example, the philosopher saying we are naturally bad, or Rousseau saying we are naturally good. At the end of the day, this moral question is there, and the Muslims are saying it's in us, but we are free to decide if we are going in one way or in the other. So this summary, Ibn Kathir, when he started to talk the tafsir al-Quran in the beginning of the Quran, saying that this is what is specifying the dignity of human being. وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي Adam is based on two things: the knowledge through your intellect and your freedom to decide, your responsibility. So this is the difference between us and the angels. اسجدوا لآدم إذ قال ربك للملائكة اسجدوا لآدم. The fact that they had to prostrate in front of human beings is based on these qualities that are so important that we have to start with. And having said that, you can understand here that there are values here in human beings that are going to help us to understand the legal framework. But we need to start with the value, the dignity of human beings to understand the efficiency of the legal framework, and not to forget this concept of human being just to go straight to the legal framework without understanding that inductively all the scholars, in everything that you read in fiqh, implicitly it's everything. إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ is how do you deal with your intention? How do you deal with your freedom? إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ is everything in your action is going to be set through your intention. Your intention is what? Is what you want to do, but it's the way you use your freedom. So out of your intellect, your conscience, everything here is connected to this implicitly and sometimes very explicitly. Now, having said that, we come now to the legal framework, and we come to what the scholars did, the fuqaha did. Once again, I'm coming through this because this is the first applied Islamic sciences, experimental sciences in the legal framework. We started in Islam with law and jurisprudence before starting anything which had to do with theology. Ilm al-Kalam even. It was very, very practical. So if you look at the way they were practical, the scholars, and inductively what was set out of this practical way of dealing with the legal framework, the first is, as I said, a concept of human being that very often we are not talking about when it comes to ethics and when it comes to implementing law in new settings, in new horizons, in new cultures, facing new challenges. You have to come to this. You have to be very cautious about this. Are we going to act in the way that we are deciding on the legal framework that is undermining the freedom of human beings? Can we do that? Can we, in the name of a legal, efficient legal system forget the very essence of freedom. And this is why now, listen to what is coming from the Muslim majority countries that are now talking about Sharia, saying freedom comes first. So because it was misunderstood, Sharia, how are you going to implement Sharia if you don't start with freedom? So now we have, leaders coming, and it's coming now that they are in power, saying, okay, be careful, there is a very important principle here that we have to protect. Freedom comes first. And this is, once again, the concept of human being, which is important. Now, if you look at the scholars, and this is why Dr. Jasser's lecture last time was important, because this was exactly what he tried to show us in the relationship between the rules, al-ahkam, and al-bu'd al-akhlaqi. He said, and very often this is something that the ulama started with, by saying, be careful. When it comes to fiqh, there is two different methodology when it comes to al-ibadat wal-mu'amalat. Al-ibadat, you can do but what is written, and mu'amalat, al-asl fil ashya al-ibaha, that the principle and in everything is permission. But when it comes to ibadat, it is said that you can do but what is written. You cannot just come with anything, and especially in two main fields, by the way, and this is where sometimes we have problems with some Salafi literalists, where they are putting, the methodology of ibadat in everything. And if you come with something which is new in Muhammad and say this is bid'ah, say no, be careful. Bid'ah, it's about very clear, codified system when it comes to al-aqidah and when it comes to al-ibadat. We are talking about these two main fields. It could be some other things, but mainly it's these two fields. We don't want to come to complicated discussions here. But ibadat al-aqidah is the creed, and then ibadat is the rituals, the 5 pillars of Islam. It's about, I hope, what are the principles of Islam. In these two fields, you should do what is written. But it means here that what the scholars are saying, that in these fields, you should understand that the texts are clear, and sometimes you don't know why. You don't know why this has been said, and this has been set for you to implement. For example, why are you praying 5 times a day? Why 7, when you are at tawaf is 7 times around the... We don't know things, but this is it. This is written. And what is the reaction of the scholars when they listen to this, or the believers? Sami'na wa ata'na. We heard and we implement. So some of the rules in this field are coming without apparent reasons. You don't know why. And in fact, if you are dealing with al-mu'amalat in this way, and this is where you will see that in the way that the scholars were dealing between al-mu'amalat and al-ibadat, it's quite clear that sometimes there is no specific reason to some of the obligations that you have. If you think in philosophical terms, and if you think in religious terms even, and if you think in spiritual terms, in fact, when we say there is no reason, you can see in spiritual terms, there is a reason for not having reason. You follow me? There is a reason for not having reasons why you are praying 5 times a day. Because in fact, this is where your intellect, dealing with your relationship with God, is saying, Sami'na wa ata'na. The reason is that you should show your intellectual humility. You don't get it all. You accept it as it is. Sami'na wa ata'na is, I heard, I don't know the reason, but I accept. Because it's coming from God. So it's a spiritual dimension. It's a kind of intellectual surrender, which is not without reason. You are not accepting not having reasons with no reason or with no rationality. It's in the name of your spiritual way of dealing with your rationality that you accept this. So there is a reason for not having reason sometimes in the rules, and this is what Tariq Ramadan, what I was talking about when he said it's not all about rationality. Sometimes you have to do things you don't know why. You don't know why, but in fact it's coming from God. This is why you are tested in the way you deal with Him. So it's the way, this relationship between your heart that is accepting, and sometimes your mind that should surrender to what the Creator, with His intention, wanted for us. So to stop by saying there are no reasons and you just have to implement is not enough. It's okay with your intellect, but in spiritual terms you have to go further than that and to understand the reason for not having reasons in some way of dealing with our worship, for example, and anything which is beyond our perception. Now, this is where the scholars were dealing with this, and then there is in al-mu'amalat in all other fields some of the prohibition, what are the rules they were acting, and what you told us last time, which is very important, and I think that you will find this in mainly you mentioned 4 areas where the scholars were dealing with, okay, when you deal with a hukm, there is a relation to it with ethics, when the scholars were saying al-hikmah, meaning what is the wisdom behind the rule, or al-illah, the raison d'etre of this rule. This is something which is also important in the way they were dealing with this. And also when they were dealing with the context and maslaha, which is the public interest of the people. In fact, when you deal with the rules, you can understand, connected to the raison d'etre or the wisdom behind and the context, that there are reasons for some rules to be set for us. So it's not just sami'na wa ata'na in everything. Of course, sami'na wa ata'na, but some of the rules should be understood through the causes, the reasons, the context, and sometimes ta'budiyya, meaning having no intellectual reason is a reason for you to worship God with all your heart without having your mind understanding everything. So this is something that you find, and the last lecture was explaining this to us in a way which was helping this relationship between the rules and the ethical dimension. Of course, also adding to this, and I will come to this, the objectives, and the rules have some objectives. We want to achieve something. There is no rules without ends, goals, purposes, and we have to get this. So all this is coming from the very beginning. It's not new. Once again, I think that all the people who think that Madrasat al-Maqasid, for example, the objectives is a new thing, it's a modern way to deal with Islam, they don't get it from the very beginning. It was there. It was there in all this way of dealing with the rules and also to understand this. So, something else which is important that should be added, that was, I would add this, because if we go to what was said by Shatibi in Muwafaqat, and you find this in, I came back after talking with Sheikh al-Qardawi, who mentioned to us the book of Sheikh Draz. I came back to the book. In fact, he wrote the book in French in La Sorbonne, and this was, and he was connected with Massignon. And the level of, he wrote the book Al-Akhlaq fil-Qur'an, ethics, éthique dans le Coran, l'éthique dans le Coran. A very important book, in fact, when he summarized many of the intention, the meaning and the understanding of al-akhlaq and ethics in the Quran, challenging Bergson, challenging Immanuel Kant, which is good, and acknowledging that there are many things that Kant was saying that are very close to what Islam is saying, and in this it's very true. I remember when I was studying Kant with one of the best teachers I had at the university, was a specialist in Kant. I was very impressed by the relationship that he had with the autonomy and morality, very close to what we are saying, even though he was trying to make it completely independent, which is exactly where we come back to Ar-Rahman, which is the source, and it cannot be only based on rationality, even though he himself was a believer. But what is important here is that he is saying that not only we have this understanding that to understand the rules we come to the raison d'etre, the causes or the reasons or the objectives or the context of maslahah. He's saying there is something in the Quran which is directing our attention to the value of things in themselves. So when you have, for example, وَأَصْلِحُوا بَيْنَ أَخَوَيْكُمْ, you have to make peace or to reconcile. You have another verse saying, الصُّلْحُ خَيْرٌ, the sulh in itself is good. So there is a value here in itself, and you are understanding the meaning of this in the meaning of this rule out of the very principle of sulh khair in itself. So it's not the cause, it's the essence. There is a system of essential values in Islam that you can understand in themselves, and then you can understand the rules. Why we have to make peace? Because peace in itself is good. And this is said in the Quran. And then even in modesty, ذَلِكَ أَزْكَ لَهُمْ أَزْكَ, it means the way you are going to dress is more pure. It's purity, it's better for them. So you have something which is better when it comes to modesty, and this is where you understand the rules. So it's not only rules out of causes and reasons, it's because it's connected to values. So anyone who is dealing with this, you can find a philosophy of law here, which is the starting point of everything, that you have this, which is not only because of the reasons, so ethics is coming from here, but in the Quran there are ethical values in the essence of some actions that we have to understand and very often when it's said, for example, in the way we treat ذَلِكَ خَيْرٌ. Khayr means the fact that we have the way we have to trade with justice in itself. This is something which is important. For example, when we are faithful with the justice in trading, and you have the reference to ذَلِكَ خَيْرٌ, meaning that this justice in trading is in itself right. So we refer to a norm here which is beyond the causes. So this is a philosophy of values that are Islamic in themselves, explaining the rules. Not only the rules are explained to the objective, but to the essence. So this is a very important point here. And we can understand that the scholars, when they were dealing with first, a concept of human being. Second, trying to deal with the rules and getting the ilm, al-hikmah, al-qasd, al-maqasid in general, and then the essence, the values. Why this is important? Is the Quran telling us about peace in itself? Yes. About yes, we have values that are explained. So some of the legal things are referring to the essence of, and the Quran is referring to this, telling us, be careful here, you have to come to the essence of this value which is important. Now, this is where we are already dealing with ethics, and the scholars were already dealing with ethics in all these fields in the way they were dealing with, and we need this from the very beginning. Why? Because in fact, if now we are told that the Quran is giving us all the overall principles, but we are not going to deal with the details. We now have to deal with ijtihad. So we have the Quran, and then we have individual and collective ijtihad. Some of the people, for example, were rejecting al-ijma' and others, like al-Zahiriyya, rejecting al-Qiyas, and Hazm was saying, no, there is nothing like it. But in fact, if you go deep in understanding what they were saying, is you need to use your mind when the Quran is silent to try to find a way to deal with new issues and new situations. How are you going to deal with this? In fact, in everything, if you want to be serious about ijtihad, faithful to the principle, faithful to the revelation, in order to find the new rules, you are obliged to come to these two dimensions I mentioned before. First, the concept of human being, to protect this, and second, the rules, and to understand the meaning of the rules. And the meaning of the rules can only be understood if you understand why, how, and in order to achieve what exactly. So the normative and the normative dimension should rely on the value and the objectives, and there will be no ijtihad with your mind if you don't understand the raison d'être and the objectives. So no ijtihad with your mind if you don't get this. If not, you are going to imitate, and to imitate could be to betray. If you imitate without understanding what it is all about, you are going to betray. So if you think about something that's about hudud, for example, why in a specific, when the text is clear-cut, for example, when it comes to السارق والسارقة فاقطعوا أيديهما, you have to cut the hands of the thief, men and women. This was stopped in a specific context. And the text is clear cut. There is no discussion about the fact that the text is clear cut. Why? Because you have to understand that this text was for specific objectives in a very specific way. So the understanding of the cause and the objective should be important. If now the context is changing, maslahat al-nas is changing, justice is changing, you can't do this. So you can't implement literally a text without understanding not only the causes, but also the objective that were connected to this text. In this way, there is something which was there from the very beginning. The ijtihad, Umar ibn al-Khattab was clear on the very meaning of the text, not betraying the text, but understanding the meaning of the text and the objective that should be achieved, which was a value, justice. If there is no justice, you are betraying the text by implementing it literally. So if we need to talk about ijtihad, anything which has to do with the legal framework, implicitly, in fact, there is an ethical background in anything which is done in ijtihad. Meaning, what do we need? What do we want to achieve with this? When the text is silent. And not only the text is silent, but Allah and the Prophet ﷺ is telling us that the silence of the text is coming out of Rahmah, Ar-Rahman. الذي علم القرآن إذا سكت عن أشياء رحمة بكم بغير نسيان. He was not forgetting. This is for you to use your mind to understand the meaning of the rules in order to be faithful to the objective and to be faithful not only to the objective but faithful to the values. I want to be clear on this. It's not only to be the objectives are based on the values, so you should get both the value and the objectives that should be achieved within the society. So, individual or collective ijtihad, if we are serious about this, there is no way but to deal with the ethical dimension. If not, we are going to be in trouble. Why? Because this is what we will find with some of the scholars with whom sometimes I have problem to deal with, is they will use the methodology of al-ibadat in al-mu'amalat, and they say, just do this because this has to be done. It's clear, this is the way. So literalism is not only something which is misunderstanding the text, is misunderstanding the methodology. And in fact, the fact that you misunderstand the methodology makes you misunderstand the very meaning of the text in all these fields. So if you understand what I mean here, which is very much this articulation which is important. Now, this is ijtihad, and then the second dimension which is helping us understand with ijtihad is that the intuition of some of the scholars very early that not only we have to come with the rules, but we need to understand that any legal system is based on objectives. If you come to the Western philosophy, this is as old as philosophy. If you read the Republic of Plato, this is there. The whole system, the whole political system is based on specific objectives. And now the scholars, for example, Al-Juwayni, Abu Hamid al-Ghazali, and then Al-Shatibi, Al-Muwafaqat, were doing is just inductively doing this. But in fact, they were reconciling what was there at the very beginning by saying, what we need to understand is that these main principles we want to achieve, this objective should be clear, based on what? Values. First, just to be clear, a concept of human being, values, and objectives. All together is there. And out of this, we can now use our ijtihad in a right way. So the very meaning of this is that what is immutable is the objectives, and the values, the essence. This is the immutable. The other things are going to change. Even the clear-cut text, if you don't get the immutable. If you don't get, understand? If what is immutable, you can say whatever you want, but if you read the Quran by taking from me my freedom, I'm not going to accept. Because my freedom is an immutable qualification I have. This is me. This is the very essence of being with God. I have to use my freedom. So if your system is taking from me my dignity of being free, that doesn't work. That it's not going to change. So and then you have other principles, and we have to set these principles using what? The other dimension of our dignity, our mind, our intellect. And then getting here something which is, there is something which is part of al-fitra. So this is why I think that all was produced last century by Ibn Ashur, coming back to the fitra and relating fitra and this natural state, yearning towards God and having something which is positive. In fact, it's positive. If you ask, if God is asking and putting some obligation, is that it's positive. Our concept of humanity and human being, it's based on a positive dimension, not something which has to do, we are naturally innocent, we are not naturally sinner. And this is completely different in the way you have a concept of human being. So when it comes to everything which has to do with al-maqasid, there is all based on values and principles and the norms that are going to be set out of our understanding of the values and the objective. So if we deal with what was done by some of the scholars in these schools, inductively is all based on this relationship that there is a need for ethics in anything which has to do with our values. So no ijtihad without this connection. It's not possible. No understanding of what we want to achieve. So it means, in fact, that it's even our understanding of Islam. Because at the end of the day, what we want to achieve is to reform ourselves and to reform the world. So if you don't get this, what we want to achieve, you're not going to get the understanding of the rules. The rules should help you to be faithful to the principle, faithful to the text, and at the same time to achieve something in the world. It's between the two things. It's this tension which is important. Now, my last point here, I'm still in my time, is it right? Still, yes, you are checking. You know how much how I am. They know. And by the way, I want to thank Dr. Jasser, who is here, and also Qatar, who is working with us and part of the center, doing the good job. So just before my conclusion, like this, I don't forget. So, why is it necessary? Let me come to some of the points that I want out of all this discussion. And once again, I want to make it clear that what I said about this concept of human being, norms, law and objectives, and all this dimension, for me it's all, of course, connected, and we have to understand that. Now, why it is necessary, as I said, it's for us to understand the rules and to acknowledge the rules that we find in the Quran with our mind, out of our understanding of the text, and then with the rules, the very meaning of the rules for the time when they were revealed and for our time now. So it's the understanding of the meaning of the rules. And by understanding the meaning of the rules, there is a second step, is implementing the rules. Implementing the rules. So al-fahm, with the knowledge and fahm, it's what we said when we are talking about what is the wisdom behind, what are the raison d'etre, and what values are we promoting. So this implementation, it's important because maslahat in-nas in the context is part of the whole process. So there is something which is coming out of our understanding of why ethics is necessary, because ethics is the way you are going to understand the relationship between the texts and the context wherever you are, with whoever you live. There will be no way for you to get, okay, how am I going to implement these rules in this context if I don't get a clear ethical understanding or ethical framework through which I can understand this. So in fact, the reference to the legal framework to be implemented in a specific context is the ethical ground. So the only way the Muslims are able to say, without sometimes understanding this, that Islam salihun, bikulli zamanin wa makanin, it's just Islam is okay and it's good for all time and all situation, it's only because there is an ethical reference that is helping us understand the meaning of this. The ethical reference is helping us to say, okay, if this is suitable for every time, in every situation, what is the common ground? What are the values that are behind the rules in order to translate the rules into a new environment respecting the values that are behind, which was implicitly there for all the scholars. Coming to a Shafi'i, traveling and changing the rules. Why? Because he's keeping the same values. He's keeping the same understanding. So the same principles, the rules are changing because he's protecting the same principles with the same objectives. So the ethical reference is behind the scene, helping this faithfulness to the meaning while seeing the legal system and some of the rules changing. Now, so this is what I was saying at the beginning, helping us to get the immutable behind the rules, and by getting the meaning of the rules and understanding the way we deal with the concept of human being and the way we deal with the values beyond the norms, we can try to be faithful beyond the changing world and the changing situations. Now, there are two other things that I want to say why it's important. The first one is internal to our Muslim communities and Muslim majority societies. In fact, when studying, and I am giving a course here this year about Sharia, Sufism and ethics. In fact, when you study ethics, when you study all what I was saying here, you go from the rules to the concept of human being. You go from the rules to the meaning and the objectives. You go from the rules to masalih and nas, the context. You understand, in fact, that it's only through ethics that you will be able to connect the legal tradition with the mystical tradition and the philosophical tradition. In fact, this is the way you can find, when the Sufi are saying to, and by the way, to all the people who think that Sufism is not part of Islam, I would say I disagree. That the mystical trend is the heart of Islam if we understand Sufism in the right way. I'm not talking about the kind of, the Sufi new look, which is flying 24-hour. Okay, I'm talking about the deep Sufi tradition, the serious Sufi tradition. And the Sufi tradition is saying something which is very important. This is why you will find the scholars who spoke the most about ethics were Sufi, in fact. Why? Because they are saying ethics is about value and it's about behavior. And akhlaq, in fact, very often in the Islamic tradition is about, it's the way you behave. And you understand this from the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, it's really the good behavior, the good character. But in fact, they are not only talking about this, they are saying, think about the rules that you have. Why God is asking you to do this. Even, and this is why it's very important, the mystical tradition is always telling you, when you have rules in al-ibadah, there is always a reason. In fact, there is a reason. In legal terms, there is no reason, because we have to do it. But in spiritual terms, there is. As I told you, it's the way you can get this humility, but it's deeper than that. It's why you have to do this. So sometimes there is a reason which is not clear when you first read the text. So this relationship between the zahir and batin is something which has to do with the ethical framework everywhere. So the Sufi are talking, and the mystical tradition are talking about the rules are important, the classical tradition, the Sufi classical tradition. The rules are important, but it's essential, critical for your heart and your minds to get the meaning of the rules and to get this ethical dimension. And you can see that sometimes they're not very happy with people coming with this kind of way of dealing with rules, is halal, haram, right and wrong, and not talking about the very essence. And why is it dangerous to disconnect the legal framework from the ethical dimension? Is that we can end up obsessed with rules with no meaning, which is the problem today. It's the very, in fact, it's a critical question, it's the very meaning of faithfulness. to what are you faithful? Are you faithful to the rule without meaning, or to the meaning with the rule? Can you deal with the rule without meaning? And once again, even in the ibadat, there is a dimension here. We're not just talking about the very essence of why you are praying, and Salat al-Fahsha. We know that this is helping you to avoid bad behavior and all this. That's good, and okay, you have a global understanding, and then you have the very understanding of this discipline, to discipline yourself and to deal with the rules. So through ethics, there is a connection between the legal and the spiritual. This is one. But not only. Through ethics, there is a connection between the legal and the philosophical. And we have to get rid of this understanding among Muslims that Islam is against philosophy. In fact, all what we are talking about, you read all the fuqaha, there is a philosophy of law. The subtitle of your book, it's about a philosophy. Of course, it's philosophy. What is philosophy? It's not to think without God. It's to systematize your thinking with God. It's a philosophy, it's a vision. It's the way you deal with human beings. So you are truly believer, but there is a system here with objectives, principles, priorities, and secondary things. It's meaning everything. Philosophy, it's a system, it's a codified system of meaning. This is a philosophy. So Islam is to be translated into a philosophy of life with a concept of life and death. And I always add to this a concept of death. So when we deal with today everything which is coming from people who are atheists or agnostic, you can say, okay, you are coming from different tradition, but if you understand Islam in the right way with this ethical framework, you can discuss with everyone, but more importantly, we come with a concept of human being, a concept of a society, a concept of interpersonal relationships. This is based on our ethical ground, with the values. So it gives us also priorities. It's very important. I'm sorry, if you want to deal with ethics in politics, you have to tell me something about freedom. If you want to talk about ethics in citizenship, I want to know about the relationship between men and women from an Islamic perspective. You can't just come with the rules if you don't start with asking and responding to this. This missing discussion is missing in the Muslim mind today, if you understand what I mean. So ethics is helping us from an Islamic perspective to reconnect philosophy as a system of meanings, a codified system of meanings, second, the spiritual dimension, and third, the legal framework. And it is clear for me that I'm responding here to some of the scholars who think, oh, you, with your center, or with your maqasid, you are trying to come with the objectives because you don't want to respect the rules. And our answer is we respect the rules without never forgetting the meanings and the objectives. But to respect the rules is part of our faithfulness. But to respect the rules blindly through imitation or without understanding the meaning, this is not going to work, because at the end we are taking the substance out of our religion. So this is where it's important for us to be able also to deal with this. And the last point here, which is important in our understanding of ethics, in the way it's a necessity today to reconnect. And what I wanted, I hope that you saw the steps through which I went from within the Islamic tradition, from within the legal framework, to coming to what is now the global understanding, or more important understanding. Ethics is also the way Muslims are going to be able to deal with other philosophies and other religions. And it's not only, some have been involved in interfaith dialogue for years now, and some people are saying, oh, we need to talk about theology. And some are saying, no, we need to talk about, our common problems. So we are between, you know, talking about God and our principles, the way we worship, and others are saying, no, what are our common challenges? How do we feel we face, you know, atheism and contemporary modern societies? And my take on this now is you can talk about, and we need to have some theological discussion, if we may use this concept, and we may talk about our common challenges. At the end of the day, where we are in touch, where we can be together talking, and this is coming from my experience with the commissions of ethics, you know, at the European level, or in the UK, or we have a commission, which is a commission which dealing with contemporary ethical questions at the European level, is really that ethics is really where we are able to understand the very meaning وتعارفوا وجعلناكم شعوبا وقبائل لتعارفوا. التعارف here, لتعارفوا, is in order for you to know each other. It's very there that I understood many things in Christianity, in Judaism, in atheism, in Buddhism, is the way they deal with contemporary issues through the ethical framework. Is what is the meaning? Because sometimes when I was to talk about an Islamic answer, they can get the very essence of what Muslims are saying about human beings. It's a very important discussion here. It's very important. It's not just tell me the way you pray. It's the very essence of what you think and the contemporary challenges. So sometimes in our interfaith dialogue, ethics is where we are able to come into something which is an interactive and positive discussion. So you can see here when we deal with this, it's also a way we are dealing with other religious traditions, with other civilizations, so outside. So from within, it helps us to have internal debate, internal discussion, and it's very important here also. Sometimes it's not easy, sometimes with some trends, when they are very literalist, it's very difficult because we are not talking about the same thing. We are not talking, you know, very often when I talk with some who are just quoting the Quran, setting the rules, it's very difficult because it's, okay, I don't disagree with what you are saying, but you don't understand from where I'm talking about the issue. So this is important. Now, having said that, the last point, as I said, just to repeat this, in all what I am saying, I'm not taking the legal framework as something that we can avoid. It's essential. So, as I said here, starting with the legal framework, inductively you come to the ethical ground. But the legal framework is a serious one. And I understand some of the concerns coming from them, some of the scholars, that some people are going too far in the objectives and they are not serious about the principles. And this is not my position. The point is to be balanced in the way we deal with this. The second is very much about understanding that from the very beginning, the scholars who were dealing with the rules were dealing with an implicit concept of human being, with a clear understanding of the meanings of the rules, and sometimes differentiating between al-ibadat and mu'amalat in a clear way. They were very clear on this, and inductively they were clear on the causes, the reasons, the objectives, and the masalah al-nas and the context. All this was there from the very beginning. And then they started to think, all this should be understood in the light of the objectives. So this is all about ethics. All this apparatus around the rules is there. And the last point, as I mentioned during my talk, but is always what I keep on repeating, all what I'm saying is also based on an understanding of Islam. So when some of the people are saying, okay, the good behavior, it's an understanding of what my religion is. In my understanding with all this, the starting point of my understanding, if I am a believer, if we have believers, if we have different religions, what is expected from all the people from their respective religion is to change this world for the better. But this is a clear understanding. This is something which is important. It's not only to say, I respect the rules. I respect the rules with an objective, is to change the world. So how am I going to use the rules, with the meaning of these rules, the ethical ground, to change the world for the better? So in all these fields. So this is why it's very important to understand the rules, but with a clear understanding of the objectives that are helping us, wherever we are, facing whatever challenges, to change the world for the better in the name of the values respecting the rules that should translate these values into practical responses to the challenges of our time. Okay, thank you. That's it. So, we have time for questions. So, you can try like this. I think we tried without, we had a try.
Yeah.
And if the back they don't hear you, you should. Okay. Go ahead.
I have a quick question. My question is.
Could you?
Can you hear me?
You hear? Why are you doing that?
I don't want to use my phone. I have a question. Don't you think that applying Islamic Sharia as the only source of legislation, or applying it, codifying it, and treating it as a legal text is against freedom? And let me explain what I mean by this. You have now a lot of estimates in the new, after the Arab Spring, they're calling for Islamic Sharia to be the provisions of Islamic Sharia to be the source of legislation. Don't you think that actually codifying these legislations and treating them as a text that we abide by deprives it from its from the needs and objectives perspective? What do you think about that? And another good question, you said that actually the public good might change or has changed. Can you explain how the public good changed over time?
I said that.
You said that.
Did I say that? Are you sure?
When you were talking about the hudud, you said that at that time it was applicable, but now the public good might make us not apply these provisions.
This is not exactly what I said, but I will explain what I meant. Okay, this is the first question. There is a problem first. Before even entering, can we go and mention, because I was asked so many times by Muslims and people of other faiths, do I think that Sharia should be in the constitution? The first problem that I have, which is leading me to think that we better avoid having it in our constitutions, and it's quite a statement here, is that the problem that I have is the understanding of Sharia by Muslims themselves. We don't have the same understanding. This is the problem. For some, Sharia is a closed system. You know, I have a problem with some of my fellow Muslims saying that I'm a Swiss citizen. And when I'm a Swiss citizen, I'm not asking the origin of the law. I'm just trying to assess the laws themselves. So if I'm a Swiss, and in my country it is said that men and women, poor and rich, black and white, people of whatever is their religion, are equal before law, I would say this is my Sharia. Sharia is not a closed system, it's my principle. I will take it as mine. So the definition of Sharia as something which is Islamic law for me is a problem. You know, I took one chapter and then one book to explain the definition of Sharia by saying it's not God's law, it's a way, you know, and the way is objectives, and the objectives, and we have to think about the laws in the light of the objectives and the way itself. So, and it's the way towards faithfulness, is how do we try to achieve this. So when we have now some fuqaha and some Muslims understanding Sharia as a closed system, you want to ask them, what do you mean by this? What do you mean by this? Are we going to take things that are good from others? And by the way, you had some Islamists from the very beginning. They had a very open vision of Sharia. So it's not all the Islamists don't agree even on the definition of Sharia. We have to be very cautious with this. So, you know, I always recall the people with Hassan al-Banna in 41 when he was going to be, he was trying to be elected in the parliament. And people from Al-Azhar and from even from wisdom saying, how come you can go in this legal system which is not an Islamic system? And his answer is, in this legal framework there are many things that are not against Islam, so I can take and reform the system from within, saying it's not a closed system. We don't have Sharia and Kufr. It's not, it came later, this. In fact, it came before and it came later, saying that we have two systems, al-Jahiliyyah wal-Islam, wal-Mujtama' al-Islami. This understanding is problematic. So now we have people evolving. So you have now Islamists saying we don't have to put it in the constitution, or some others saying it's not the exclusive reference. It could be one among others. And some still say it should be only this one. So with the people who are saying it should be only this one, I have a problem with their understanding, so I will challenge this understanding. And then people saying it could be one or many, among others. That's fine. Let us talk about what do we mean by this. And the others saying, no, we don't have. Rashid al-Nushi, for example, he was of the opinion that in the Tunisian constitution, we don't have to refer to Sharia, and we can avoid it. Meaning that, even if it's a source, we should not put it as something, because he's challenged by so many trends from within. So once again, we don't have a clear understanding or a clear position on this, and I think two things that we have to say. Many different positions from the Islamists, and my main concern, my main problem is, what do you mean with Sharia? What do we mean exactly, and what constitutes Sharia itself? So I would say, for me, it's an open system. An open system. It's not a closed system. It's exactly like our identity. Muslims have open identity because they can take from all the cultures. We have principles, but we can take what is good from all the cultures. Sharia should be something like this, which is an open system. About what I tried to say when it comes to what I was saying is that the social situation, the social setting, and the situation sometimes are changing. So in time of poverty or famine or something like this, you are not able to deal with the rules in the same way, because if we implement the rules in this situation, it's going to be unfair. It's just injustice. And you have an overall value. Inna Allah ya'muru bil 'adl. God commands justice. So justice is beyond your understanding. And in order to be faithful to the literal meaning of the text, you are going to betray the fundamental principle of Islam, because Islam is all about justice. So this is, and you have to deal with the context. You have to understand what is happening. I'm sorry to go now and to say in our societies, in Muslim majority countries, and to come with a very tough position by saying we have to punish the people, when everything in the society sometimes is completely opposite to good behavior and morality. You cannot doubly punish the victims of the system and the people who are not knowledgeable about the principles. This is my position. So one there and then. Go ahead.
If our scholars legislate as a response, can you hear me?
Yes.
If our scholars legislate as a response to the needs and context of the Muslim society, yet the Muslim society evolves in the direction in which our scholars legislate, how do we prevent an outward spiral? How do we prevent sort of heading further and further away? Our society changes in a certain direction, scholars therefore legislate in a certain direction. Are you a bit worried about?
Yes, that's a very important question, and this is the question that I have every time when I am dealing with, the context. That some scholars and some Muslims, they think that we are putting or thinking too much about the context and getting the context within the area of our study when it comes to set some laws. What I said, once again, the source is God, and the text is the Quran and the Sunnah. These are the scriptural sources that we are respecting. We agree on that. Now we have rules that are immutable and that we respect. They are not going to change when it comes to al-aqidah and al-ibadat, and also the prohibitions. We stick to this. Okay, but these are the principles. This is, some of the scholars are saying, al-ma'lum min ad-din min darura, it's the necessity of our religion, this is the framework we abide by this. Now, let me tell you something. That some of the scholars, when it comes to implementing fiqh, Islamic law and jurisprudence, they are protected, okay, in a situation where we have to protect Islam. And I accept this as a first step. But you will say something which is important. Willing it or not, all the scholars, except the people who are isolating themselves from the surrounding world, the Salafi, they are isolating themselves. But if you look at their life, in one way or in another, they are connected with this life. They are not responding to the challenges, but trying to avoid the challenges of the time by being protected. Now the scholars and the great majority of the ulama in all the councils that we have of fiqh, what are they doing? They are strict with the rules, but they are looking at the way the world is changing. What are they doing? They are producing new rules, new fatwa to face the challenges of the time, isn't it? You will see that at the end of the day, what they are doing with the world is to try to find fatwa that are helping us to protect ourselves in this world, changing to adapt ourselves to the world the way it is. This is what we are doing now. We are protected out of adaptation to the world because the world is changing, willing it or not. This position is acceptable and we have to accept it. My understanding is the world is changing, if you willing it or not, you have to deal with it. How are you going to do this? Are you going to come to the rules by being protected by saying this is halal, 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 and this is haram, and shubuhat? Sometimes you have haja, you have a necessity, you have an imperative, so you have fatwa coming out of this, and at the end this is what we have. We can do things that are not really right, but because of the context we can understand. Okay, this is what is happening now with scholars who are very strict as to the rules. For me, this is acceptable as a first step. But my understanding of the way we deal with the context is not to surrender to the context the way it is. But how are you going to avoid to surrender to the context, surrendering to the context, if you are dealing with issues? Is it by coming to the rules and just stick to them, or to get the meanings and also to think about what do you want to achieve today in order to change the situation, not only to adapt to the situation? So you heard in the presentation that I was talking about transformational reform, which I think that we have to do is to stick to the principles, to get the objectives, and to transform the world for the better, not to adapt to what is wrong. So, what is the contribution of Muslims today in anything which has to do to change the world in ethical terms? Tell me. Where the Muslims today are giving something to the world, saying this is our vision to change the world in ethical terms. Look at the economic field, where we have done so much. And once again, I'm saying that's good, that's fine, but do we have an alternative economic system? We don't. We just have halal in the overall system. So I talked about this in radical reform. I don't want to start this discussion again. But my point in dealing with your question is very much this. It's not to be completely lost in the context, but to be faithful to the principle at the point that we want these principles to help us to change the world, not to adapt to the world. And to do this, we need to have the ethical understanding, the meaning, the ethical goals that are coming with the rules. If you want to change and not to be on the defensive, we need to have this understanding. This is why I think that it's a balanced process. Is how do we deal with both? But I'm not going to. I agree with the implicit dimension of your question. We have to be very cautious not to put all the emphasis on the context. It's moving, so let us find new answers. No, anyway, we need to have some. Life is like this. It's just in all the Muslim majority societies. This is it. Why, for example, we had this discussion in Muslim majority societies that are liberating themselves now and say, what about freedom? Why do we talk now about freedom? Because we have to deal with responsibility. You have to deal with people. They don't accept something which is imposing the Islamic system. We are free and we want freedom. So how do we deal with this? So I think that these are questions that we have to deal with, and we can't just have the defensive approach by saying this is Islam with our rules. We need to have something which is helping us understand the challenges. Speak to them as well, not only to me.
So regarding the values in the Quran, you seem to say that there are international values that can be understood by every human being. So my question is that do you think culture can modify a value? I mean, can a value be changed with time by the culture from something good to something bad?
What do you mean?
I mean,
do you have something in mind?
Not specific.
Are you sure?
Sometimes you can speak to someone, and for you, you can speak, about a value, and you think it's something good, but in the other side, it's something bad. So I don't know.
No, it's a very good question. It is an important question. I didn't mean that all our principles are going to be understood by all or accepted by all. No, I think that there are rules and there are principles and prohibitions that are specific to our understanding of the text that's coming from the revelation.
But they should.
No? Why?
Then we should. Because they are from God.
No, they are coming from God, but there are things that could be understood by your minds but not accepted by your minds. For example, you were talking about homosexuality. So in rational terms, when people are coming to you and say, okay, look, I love a man, and that's me. That's my freedom. So I want to, so you can understand that. Rationally you can understand. But for me, it's not the divine project. It's not a man who's a man and a woman who's a woman. Now, I can respect who you are. I don't agree with this behavior. So in moral terms, there is something which is coming from the revelation that is not going to be universal in rational terms. Because you can understand here, for example, I saw some Muslims going very far in this by saying we should reassess the meaning of family in Islam. So for me it's problematic because this is exactly where we are losing some of the principles. So I wouldn't go as far as that. I'm not going as far as that. I really think that I want the people who may disagree with me on this to accept something which is accept that the logic of your reason is not enough to get the dimension of my belief. I really think that this is coming from God, and they are so I can take this position by saying I respect the dignity of human being, but there are principles on which I rely because I believe in them coming from the Quran. So I wouldn't say that everything which is coming from the revelation is going to be understood. I might say they could be understood, but I wouldn't say, of course, they are going to be accepted. Which is not the same, but it's a very important thing. The very meaning of rejecting God is the shaitan acknowledged his presence but refused it. Aba wastakbara. Aba. It's a rejection, it's denied, but he was knowing that God was there. So there is something which at one point you think that there is here something which is not the same. Even though it can be understood. So 1, 2, and 3, and then we stop, I think. Go ahead.
My question is, it's very obvious that Islam gives great importance to intellect. However, However, intellect is neglected as a source of legislation. So why intellect is not, if you like, component of the Islamic legal system? For the Quran, we have the Quran, Sunnah, consensus, and Qiyas. So we don't see intellect, included in the Islamic legal system.
No, what you are referring to is the sources, the Quran, the Sunnah, and all the other, what we have in all the schools, the Shia and the Sunni schools of law. In fact, it's everywhere intellect as the means to get to the sources. Okay, so you are talking about the sources, but to get the source, the revelation, the Quran, you need intellect. The Sunnah, you need intellect. Al-Qiyas, of course, there is no way to deal with individual and collective ijtihad without the intellect. So it's everywhere. So it's implicitly the means for all the sources. And some of the scholars will add, all the scholars in one way or another will add to this that not only the intellect is important, is the light coming from your heart, is your discernment, is your faith, is your taqwa. So it's very important to understand that your mind understands, but your heart as well. And there are levels of understanding the text. And sometimes the ethical ground is not only coming from your mind. It's coming from your heart. It's coming from an in-depth understanding of the text. So it's everywhere. So it's not because it's not in the sources. Be careful. But you are asking another question, which was, in fact, clearly put by the Mu'tazila, which is a philosophical trend saying the source of ethics could be my mind. It's not only coming from the texts. So we had this deep discussion between the Mu'tazila, Al-Ash'ariyya, Al-Maturidiyya, who are in between saying yes, it can come from the text and it can come from your mind as a source. So this is why, for example, it could be a source, even though in the legal tradition it's understood as a means. Now we have lots of scholars who said not only it's a means, but it can be a source of producing ethical values. So it's an important question for us, I would say. For me, in all my life, of course, my reason is a source and could be a source of ethical values, which are not at all with the revelation, because this is the very understanding, for example, of, one verse that you will find in the legal tradition, you will find it in the Sufi tradition, in the philosophical tradition, and this is why it's overlapping the whole three dimensions, is this verse, Nurun ala nur, is light upon light. And the meaning of light here is, of course, the revelation and the light of your intellect. Intellect as a light, that you get something that, what is coming from the Quran, it's, Abu Hamid al-Ghazali was talking about intellect as wahyun dakhili. It's an inner revelation, inward revelation. So that's so important. So it's not there, it's there everywhere as a means, but I would say we might have to think about, and not we might have, but it has also been understood and talked about as a source in itself. All the question is, can we get values with autonomous rationality? Is it possible to have something which is called autonomous rationality? That's another question. It's another lecture. There were two other questions. Yes, go ahead.
I realized that Quran is a very open text. And when 1,000 scholars, for example, interpret one ayah, can be 1,001 interpretations.
Have you seen that somewhere?
Yeah,
can you give me an example? Do you have one example of one ayah with 1,001 interpretation?
1,000 scholars with 1,001 interpretations. It's just exaggerated. So I'm just wondering, when you say that you need to really assess the definition of something, okay? Feminism or whatever it is, okay? I'm just wondering, okay, what is the basis you assess ayah? It's a Allah verses. What is the basis until you can reassess the meaning and how you come into the conclusions? Because scholars, like for example Amina Wadud, okay, she can like interpret ayah, become very spectacular interpretation. So I'm just wondering how, because we are 1,500 years apart from Prophet Muhammad, and then anything can happen.
No, I think that we cannot go as far as to say that the text is not saying or it's saying anything. The text, you have to come to the text and to the verse with the grammar, the morphology, and the text is saying something itself. So I wouldn't say it's 1,001 with 1,000 scholars. We have on some verses, yes, they are open for interpretation. We have to accept this. We have to accept that some verses, some are more explicit than others, and it is said in the Quran, in Surah Al-Imran, it is said that we have Tashabihat and we have Muhkamat. All this is said in the Quran, so we have different types of verses. Some of the verses are going to be open, are not very much open to understanding because they are clear-cut. Now, it doesn't mean that because they are clear-cut in what they are saying themselves or the very meaning of the verse, that there is no room for interpretation in the implementation in a specific context. So we are going to have interpretations here. And some of the great majority of the verses are open for interpretation because they are not clear-cut. So we will have scholars based on the wordings, the semantic, the grammar, and then other dimension, which is how do we understand the causes, the raison d'être, or the objectives, or the context, or maslahat al-nas, and you will have different interpretations. So in Islam we accept this, and the starting point of all of us here is to be clear that there is an accepted diversity in Islam. Now, the question is not about having many interpretations, is do we go too far as to interpretations not respecting some accepted limits or set limits by Islam. This is where we have this problem. It's a question of if Islam is a way, the limits can be quite wide and you have different ways of walking on this path, and there are many interpretations that we have to accept. The question with some of the scholars is sometimes we can see that these interpretations could be okay with the text, but they are not relying on other texts. They are not relying on other clear-cut texts, and it's a very specific interpretation. And sometimes, even with me, some people are saying you might be influenced by the cultural dimension. In your way you are dealing with and that's true, of course. Born and raised in the West, my culture is influencing me in the way I read the text. Now the point is not to do with the text or to go as far as to say that something which is haram is halal or the opposite, and to try to find an interpretation which is not betraying the very meaning of the sources or the text itself, and trying to find a way to deal with the environment. So we have to accept this. We have to accept that from the very beginning, having such verses that are not clear-cut, there are many interpretations. So in itself, it's not wrong. So the question is much more about the limits. I don't know if I answer your question. But if I'm not, tell me what is missing.
I think something missing is the basis that until how much that you can interpret something and reassess something. Because I don't know if you know the Arab words is something that if you speak with your mind, it can be dangerous because there's a verses of Allah. I don't know.
Yes, no, but
oh, yeah.
No, that's fine. The point is that be careful not only to follow your own interpretation and your own desires. There is a text here that you have, and it's a question of limits. Okay, how far can we go? We can go very far, and we will say something that it's very important. Many of the Muslims who are here in this room, they are repeating things, and they don't know that in the Islamic tradition, many other views were said by scholars that are not known by the public. So sometimes when we are reassessing interpretation, we might come back to our tradition to see that some scholars said things that were much more open than what we are saying now. One. Second, that sometimes our interpretation of the text could be based on something which is, oh, this was the general opinion of the scholars, and it might be now that we can see that it's not exactly it's exactly right. We are reassessing because the challenges of our time are pushing us to come back to the text and ask ourselves, is this right or not? So you know, for example, in many things, in many things that are so important, you know that what is said in Islam that when you are a Muslim woman, you cannot marry a non-Muslim. So this is something which is a rule. If you come back to the Islamic tradition, not on this issue, even in this issue it's problematic, but if you come to something which is interesting, that, for example, you are married and a woman is married to someone who is not a Muslim, and all of a sudden she wants to convert to Islam. Okay, what is the position? She wants to convert to Islam. He's not a Muslim. Up to 25 years ago, the majority answers of the scholars was she had to divorce. Okay, and Hassan al-Turabi, a sheikh from Sudan, in the United States of America once said his opinion was no. If the husband is accepting her practice and leaves her to do what she wants to do, there is no obligation for her to divorce. All the scholars except him in the United States, it was in Canada I think, or in the United States, in North America, came against him by saying that's wrong. She had to divorce. Sheikh Yusuf al-Qardawi, after a while, wrote a book saying, once I was in this meeting and Sheikh Hassan al-Turabi said this, I was against him. I came back to the opinions of the scholars, and my opinion has changed. That even Ibn Taymiyyah, centuries ago, had another position on this. So we have 9 different opinions. The great majority of the Muslims didn't know about that because we don't know our tradition. We don't know our Torah. We don't know what the scholars said. So we might sometimes have to come back to what was said. That we'll see that some of the scholars of the past were not only more courageous, but open to many things that were in the way they were interpreted. But as today we are on the defensive, scared, and we think that we are attacked, and there is a psychology here which has to do with our way to deal with. One of the main problems of ethics for Muslims today is their psychology. You know, when you feel threatened, you stick to the rules and you don't come to ethics. This is coming from a mind which is under pressure. So what I'm saying here is that even Sheikh Yusuf al-Qardawi in his book, he's acknowledging that at that time he had this position and he changed his mind. And in many other issues it happened. So you have scholars in the past who did or said things that were much more open. Now, not only we have to do this, but we also have to come with sometimes some answers. It might be that the position of the scholars on a specific issue was based on specific knowledge of the time. Now we have to come with a specific knowledge for our time. It doesn't mean to accept everything that is coming from the context. We have to be clear and strict on the fundamental rules, but sometimes we have to access things that are, in fact, with your question, it might be that some of the interpretations of the text were cultural. They were not only objective, they were not only the text, it was coming from a specific culture. There are many things in the legal tradition, Islamic legal tradition, that are much more Arabic than Islamic, if you understand what I mean, in cultural terms. So we have to question.
Maybe that's an important point that, I mean, you can clarify that legislation, the interpretation is multi-layered. It doesn't just come into the context now, but it goes through the context back then. And then it's like it's two filters at the very least. It has to go through the context of 1400 years ago, as well as come to, I mean, I think sometimes we understand that scholars just jump straight into our context, and that's why we're a bit defensive. But actually, the scholars have gone through at least one, if not several contexts previous, before they come to an interpretation relevant to our context today. I don't know if that's...
No, that's good that you are saying that we have to add this, because I completely agree with what you are saying. In the book Radical Reform, and in the book that I wrote before, when I was dealing with, you know, the contemporary Islamic challenges, and even when I was, you know, I wrote the foreword for the Council of Islamic Fatwa and Research in Europe. And I wrote when they first published by saying we need a double dialectical process. In fact, between the rules and the context and what the scholars were doing with their own context, there is a lot of cultural dimension in the Shafi'i and all these scholars. They were in a specific period of time. So we have to do three things, in fact, and this is the double dialectical process, is the revelation is a specific context, the scholar with his context, and our context now. So sometimes this is very complex, but we need to go and to reassess this. So what the Salafi literalists are saying by pushing us to come back to the text is good. The way it's how we come back to the text, how we come back to the text, because very often they think that the Arabic culture of the beginning is the only glasses or prism through which you have to look at the text. This is not to universalize the text, it's to make it something which is very cultural, to Arabize the Quran. So it's in Arabic language, but not in Arabic culture. Hopefully. It's okay, this was the last one.
I'm Tariq from Georgetown University. So I assume that this ethical methodology, you're calling people from different traditions, religion, and cultures to come to this ethical methodology. So if I'm not mistaken, my question is, then what's special about Islam? And I mean by that specifically the sociological role that Islam plays. Let's leave rules aside, since they are we always have different opinions and stuff, and go to the sociological rule about the community, the concept of jama'ah. So the world today is changing towards individualism, and this is so clear. And this doesn't really oppose the idea of ethics, but it does oppose the concept of jama'ah. So what's special about Islam in this aspect?
What do you mean by jama'ah?
The Quranic discourse in general is always addressing the jama'at mu'min, addressing mu'min in general.
And sometimes nas.
And nas, of course, yeah. But we know that nas, it's a general thing. It's da'wah more, it's da'wah, not specific for Muslims. So when it comes to Muslims, it's talking about jama'ah. The role of jama'ah in the world is what changes the world to a better world, right? So,
can you hear the question, by the way? Have you heard the question? They're not moving at yes? Okay. So, you want to end your...
Yeah. So I'm saying, if the universal value today is individualism, and I'm not talking about Sharia, I'm talking about the sociological role of Islam, how does this go with the concept of Jama'ah? Because I think, or I learned that Islam did a lot to empower the concept of Jama'ah, the concept of community. And I think this is much more important even than Sharia. Because even in the same community, people had different opinions and they were living together with different, different courts, different mosques, etc. But the Jama'ah is what protected Islam and not the Sharia.
Disputable. Anyway. But I think Let me say something. It's interesting, just to make it clear which kind of methodology. It's not, the point is not to come with people of other faiths and other religion and to come together and say, okay,
let's take it.
We have a common ethics and that. No, no, no. It's seriously, truly Islamic legislation and ethics. It's the Islamic framework. Okay? So, what we are saying is that all the scholars, ulama al-nusus, the people who are going to work on are Muslim scholars, of course, and we are talking, this is it, we are not going to produce something which is a secular or a non-religious, no. We are coming from a specific tradition, it's Islamic. Now, our point here is, when we talk about the contemporary challenges, to understand, for example, what are the contemporary challenges in, for example, the first workshop that we'll have is on bioethics. Okay? You have scholars who are religious and not religious, who are saying, we set the 4 universal principles of bioethics. Okay? What is our position as Muslims? Do we accept? Do we reject? Are we selective? Can we add something? I would say we can add something coming with our religion. So this is where sometimes you have people in a specific context, and also we also have Muslims who are practitioners. So we might rely on experts and ulama, scholars in their field, having the most accurate knowledge in these fields of the challenges of our time. And we are going to use that knowledge when they have an ethical concern to challenge the scholars to come with something which is more accurate and precise in this field. You understand my point? So it's not just it's to be challenged with the contemporary knowledge. Now, having said this, it's also to come with something which is coming from I would say, I don't know, you say Jama'ah, I would say the Ummah, and the understanding of Ummah for me, it's really the religious community, the spiritual community, this communion that we have within the community, which is important because it is protecting Islam. We are not going to agree on something which is wrong. This is coming from the Hadith, the Prophet ﷺ. We are not. It's not possible. There is something which is helping us to protect this religion. It doesn't mean that we are not going to be misled as a whole, that we should not rely on the knowledge coming from other people in specific fields. So the scholars are coming from the Islamic tradition when it comes to the text. But the knowledge of the context is not only coming from Muslim minds, because we don't have all these dimensions. And some, it's very interesting. The very understanding of the ta'aruf with this knowledge, and it's very much about this. It's just some are putting some principles and ethical concerns in a specific dimension. We have to think about this. For example, in economy, in many things that I have seen produced by Christians or even atheists in South America, economic alternative systems that are much more Islamic than many things that the Muslims are doing. So what I'm going to do? I'm going to find something and say, okay, it's all Islamic? No. I want to take this knowledge, I want to take this expertise and the knowledge of how it works to help us with this discussion to come with something which is a legal understanding of the objective, which is quite different. Not closed, but using the knowledge from wherever it comes. You understand? So this is why I think that we can push in this direction.
I didn't mean that it's just this, of course.
No, but you didn't mean this. But I can understand someone listening to what we are saying or having a very broad understanding of what we are talking about. Because I've heard people coming to me say, "Oh, your center is about bringing non-Muslims and to tell us what Islam is all about." No, I'm not saying this at all. It's not the point. It's not the point at all. And this is why with all the questions that we are we have to be very cautious. It's always good to have people saying, okay, what is the philosophy? What are the objectives? What do you want to do? So I think that the only way to say what you know, to do what you said right now is to transform the world for the better, is to try to get the more accurate knowledge of the challenges of our times in specific fields and to try to push. Of course we can do, it's just now what we need to reassess is the methodology. The methodology is important. We are not going to come with all the answers, it's not possible. You just, even for example in bioethics, we are just touching 2 questions. In politics, 2 questions. But what is important is not only the answers to the 2 questions, is with the answers to the 2 questions, the methodology that we are trying to push and the philosophy based on the objectives and the way we deal with the text. You understand? It's much more questioning the methodology, getting a sense of a philosophy of law, and a sense of how do we deal with the contemporary challenges. It's a humble task, but very difficult, because you are touching, you know what is the problem? We are touching 2 things. Exactly what happened in our discussion here is the psychology, how do we deal with it? We are on the defensive. And the second is authority. Who has the authority? And why we are not. You know, I like very much what we have a brother who is working on the bioethics, Dr. Ali, is with us organizing the first. He was writing, once I was reading what he said, he wrote lots of things on bioethics, and I was reading his papers, and I was impressed, and I liked the fact that he was saying, in fact, it's when you get doctors and medical doctors in the process that in fact you enhance the role of the scholars, you do not diminish it. I agree with that. I think it's very true. If only they understand. Okay, that's okay. Thank you so much.